I never thought the woman who raised me would be the one my wife tried to destroy. If you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment. Now let's get into it. My name is Marcus Chen, and I built my empire from nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. I had something most billionaires don't talk about in their success stories. I had Mama Rose. She wasn't my biological mother. She was the woman who found me abandoned in a hospital waiting room when I was 3 days old, wrapped in a thin blanket with a note that simply said, "Please give him a better life." Mama Rose was a janitor at that hospital. She was 62 years old, had raised 5 kids of her own, buried a husband, and had every reason to walk past that crying baby and let someone else deal with it. But she didn't. She picked me up, and from that moment, I became hers. Growing up, we didn't have much. Mama Rose worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. She cleaned offices at night, worked at a laundromat during the day, and sang at the church on Sundays for a little extra cash. That woman had a voice that could make angels weep. I'm not exaggerating. When Mama Rose sang, the whole neighborhood would stop and listen. People would open their windows just to hear her voice float through the streets. She had this gift, this raw, powerful talent that could have made her famous if life had dealt her a different hand. But instead of chasing dreams, she chose to raise me. I remember being 7 years old, sitting in our tiny apartment, watching her count coins on the kitchen table to see if we could afford milk that week. I asked her why she didn't try to become a famous singer. She looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "Baby, some people are meant to shine on stages, and some people are meant to shine in the lives of the ones they love. I chose you, and I'd choose you 1,000,000 times over." That moment changed everything for me. I decided right then that I would make something of myself, not just for me, but for her. I would give her the life she deserved. I worked harder than anyone I knew. I got scholarships, worked multiple jobs through college, taught myself coding in the library, and launched my first tech startup at 23. It failed, spectacularly. I lost everything and had to move back in with Mama Rose. She was 70 by then, still working, still singing, still believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. She'd make me breakfast every morning and tell me, "Marcus, failure is just success that hasn't finished cooking yet. You keep stirring that pot, baby." So I did. I started again. And this time, it worked. By the time I was 30, my company was valued at over $2 billion. I bought Mama Rose a house. Not just any house, but a beautiful home with a garden where she could grow her tomatoes and a music room where she could sing whenever she wanted. I hired people to help her, made sure she never had to work another day in her life. She cried when I gave her the keys. She said, "Marcus, you didn't have to do all this." I told her, "Mama, you gave me everything when you had nothing. This is just the beginning." Then I met Victoria. She was beautiful, sophisticated, educated, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations. We met at a charity gala, and she seemed fascinated by my story. She called me inspiring. She said she admired how I'd built myself up from nothing. We dated for 2 years, and I thought I'd found someone who understood where I came from and where I was going. I proposed to her on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and she said yes without hesitation. The wedding was massive. 300 guests, covered by magazines, the whole spectacle. Mama Rose was there, of course, sitting in the front row, crying tears of joy. She wore a beautiful purple dress I'd bought her, and she looked like royalty. During the reception, I asked her to sing for us. She was hesitant at first, but when she finally took the microphone, the entire room fell silent. She sang At Last by Etta James, and I swear there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Victoria seemed moved, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The first year of marriage was good, or at least I thought it was. I was traveling constantly for business, closing deals, expanding the company. Victoria seemed happy enough, shopping with her friends, redecorating our penthouse, planning charity events. Mama Rose had moved into the guest house on our property. I wanted her close, wanted to see her every day. Victoria had smiled when I suggested it, said it was sweet that I was so devoted to my mother. I should have paid more attention to how tight that smile was. The cracks started showing slowly. I'd come home and sensed tension between Victoria and Mama Rose, but whenever I asked about it, both of them would brush it off. Victoria would say everything was fine, and Mama Rose would just smile and change the subject. But I noticed things. Mama Rose started eating her meals alone in the guest house instead of joining us for dinner. She stopped coming to the main house unless I specifically invited her. When I asked her why, she said she didn't want to intrude on our marriage, that newlyweds needed their space. Something about the way she said it felt wrong, but I was so busy with work that I didn't push. Then came the small comments from Victoria. Little things at first. She'd mentioned that Mama Rose's cooking was too heavy, too unhealthy. She'd suggest that maybe Mama Rose should consider updating her wardrobe, that the clothes she wore were a bit dated. She'd laugh about how Mama Rose pronounced certain words, mimicking her accent when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I'd correct her, tell her it wasn't funny, and she'd apologize, say she was just joking, that I was being too sensitive. I started to feel like I was caught between two worlds, trying to keep peace between the woman who raised me and the woman I'd married. One evening, about 18 months into our marriage, I came home early from a business trip. My meetings in Tokyo had been canceled at the last minute, and I'd caught an earlier flight. I didn't tell anyone I was coming home. I wanted to surprise Victoria, maybe take her out to dinner, reconnect. We'd been distant lately, and I thought a spontaneous date night might help. I pulled into our driveway around 6 in the evening, the sun just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As I walked toward the house, I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. Music. No, not music. Singing. Mama Rose's voice, powerful and clear, floating through the air. It was coming from the main house, which was unusual because she rarely went there anymore. I followed the sound, my briefcase still in my hand, curious about what was happening. The front door was unlocked, and I stepped inside quietly, not wanting to interrupt. What I saw made my heart stop. There, in our living room, was Mama Rose. She was standing in the center of the room, eyes closed, singing with everything she had. Her voice filled every corner of that space, rich and soulful, singing an old gospel song I remembered from childhood. But that wasn't what shocked me. It was Victoria. My wife was sitting on the couch and she was crying. Not polite tears, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs. Her face was in her hands, her shoulders shaking, completely overcome with emotion. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to understand what I was witnessing. Mama Rose finished her song, the last note hanging in the air like a prayer. She opened her eyes and saw Victoria crying, and instead of looking triumphant or satisfied, her face showed only compassion. She walked over to my wife, sat down beside her, and pulled her into a hug. Victoria collapsed against her, crying even harder, and I heard her say something that made my blood run cold. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I've been horrible to you, and you've been nothing but kind to me. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I must have made a sound because both women looked up and saw me standing there. Victoria's face went pale. She jumped up from the couch, wiping her eyes frantically, trying to compose herself. Mama Rose just looked at me with those knowing eyes, the same eyes that had seen through every lie I'd ever told as a child, every excuse, every half-truth. I walked into the room slowly, setting my briefcase down, my mind racing with questions. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked terrified, like a child caught doing something wrong. Mama Rose stood up, smoothed down her yellow dress, and said gently, "Marcus, baby, I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." We sat down, the three of us, in that living room that suddenly felt too big and too small at the same time. Mama Rose began to speak, and what she told me shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. For the past year, Victoria had been making her life miserable. It started small, comments about how Mama Rose didn't fit into our world, how her presence made Victoria uncomfortable around her friends, how embarrassing it was to have to explain that my mother was a former janitor. Victoria would ask her to stay in the guest house when they had company, would introduce her as the help, if anyone asked, would criticize everything from the way she dressed to the way she spoke. But it got worse. Victoria had been actively trying to push Mama Rose out of my life. She'd intercept phone calls, tell Mama Rose I was too busy to see her, cancel plans I'd made with her without telling me. She'd make snide comments about Mama Rose's age, suggest that maybe she'd be happier in a retirement community, that it wasn't fair to burden us with her care. She'd even gone so far as to research facilities, leaving brochures around the house where Mama Rose would find them. As Mama Rose spoke, I felt my world tilting. I looked at Victoria, waiting for her to deny it, to tell me it wasn't true. But she didn't. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, nodding. When Mama Rose finished, there was a long silence. I didn't trust myself to speak. The anger building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. This woman, my wife, had been systematically trying to remove the most important person in my life, and I'd been too blind to see it. Why? I finally managed to ask Victoria. Why would you do this? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something real in her face. Shame. Deep, crushing shame. She took a shaky breath and began to explain. She said that from the moment we got engaged, her family had been in her ear. They'd never approved of me, not really. They thought I was too new money, too rough around the edges, too different from their world. But what they really couldn't accept was Mama Rose. Victoria's mother had told her that having a black woman, a former janitor, as the matriarch of the family would be social suicide. Her father had suggested that once we were married, I'd naturally distance myself from my past, that Mama Rose would fade into the background. When that didn't happen, when I insisted on keeping Mama Rose close, Victoria felt pressure from her family to do something about it. So she did. She started trying to push Mama Rose away, thinking that if she could just create enough distance, I'd eventually accept it and move on. But something had changed today. Victoria had come home early from lunch with her mother, another session of being told how disappointed they were in her for not handling the Mama Rose situation. She'd been feeling angry and frustrated, and she'd gone to the guest house to confront Mama Rose, to tell her once and for all that she needed to leave. But when she got there, she found Mama Rose in her music room, singing. Just singing to herself, lost in the music, her face peaceful and joyful. Victoria said she'd stood in the doorway listening, and something inside her broke. She realized what she'd been doing, who she'd become. She'd been raised to value status and appearances over humanity and kindness. She'd been taught that people like Mama Rose were beneath her, not worthy of respect or consideration. But hearing that voice, seeing that joy, she suddenly understood what I'd been trying to tell her all along. Mama Rose wasn't just my past. She was my foundation. She was the reason I was the man Victoria had claimed to fall in love with. Victoria had broken down right there, and Mama Rose, instead of turning her away, had invited her in. They'd talked for hours. Victoria had confessed everything, all the cruel things she'd done and said, all the ways she'd tried to push Mama Rose out. And Mama Rose, in her infinite grace, had listened. She didn't yell or condemn. She just listened. Then she'd started singing, the way she always did when emotions ran too high for words. And that's when I'd walked in. I sat there processing everything I'd just heard. Part of me wanted to explode, to throw Victoria out, to end the marriage right then and there. How could I stay with someone who treated Mama Rose this way? But another part of me, the part that Mama Rose had raised, knew that people were complicated. Victoria had been wrong, terribly wrong, but she was also a product of her upbringing, just like I was a product of mine. The difference was, I'd been raised by someone who taught me that love and character mattered more than status and wealth. I looked at Mama Rose, and she gave me that small smile that said she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Marcus," she said softly, "I didn't tell you all this to break up your marriage. I told you because secrets are poison, and this family was dying from the inside. Victoria made mistakes, big ones. But she's here now, being honest, trying to make it right. That takes courage. The question is, what are you all going to do with this truth? I turned to Victoria. I need time, I told her. I need time to process this, to figure out if we can come back from this. She nodded, not arguing, not making excuses. I understand, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut off my family if I have to. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see what I almost destroyed, and I'm so ashamed. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Victoria moved into one of our other properties while we figured things out. She started therapy, both individual and eventually with me. She cut contact with her parents, who were furious that she'd chosen me and Mama Rose over them. She began volunteering at a community center in the neighborhood where Mama Rose and I had lived when I was growing up, working with kids from similar backgrounds. She was trying, really trying, to understand the world she'd been so quick to dismiss. Mama Rose, true to her nature, was the one who advocated for giving Victoria another chance. People can change, Marcus, she'd tell me. I've seen it happen. The question is whether they want to change, and whether you can forgive, not forget, but forgive. I struggled with it. Every time I looked at Victoria, I remembered all the times Mama Rose had seemed sad or withdrawn, and I wondered what had happened that I'd missed. The guilt ate at me. How had I not seen it? How had I let this happen under my own roof? But slowly things began to shift. Victoria started spending time with Mama Rose, real time. Not obligatory family dinners, but actual conversations. She asked about Mama Rose's life, her childhood, her dreams. She learned about the husband Mama Rose had lost, the children she'd raised, the sacrifices she'd made. She started to see Mama Rose not as an obstacle or an embarrassment, but as a person. A remarkable person who'd lived an extraordinary life, even if it wasn't the kind of life Victoria had been taught to value. One day, about 6 months after that evening I'd come home early, Victoria asked Mama Rose to teach her to sing. I was there when it happened, and I saw Mama Rose's face light up in a way it hadn't in years. They started having weekly sessions in the music room. Victoria wasn't naturally talented like Mama Rose, but she worked at it, and more importantly, she listened. She listened to the stories behind the songs, the history, the pain and joy embedded in every note. Music became their bridge, the thing that connected them across all the differences that had once seemed insurmountable. I watched my wife transform. The woman who'd been so concerned with appearances and status began to care about substance and character. She started asking questions about social justice, about inequality, about the systems that had made Mama Rose's life so much harder than it needed to be. She used her family's money and connections not for social climbing, but to fund scholarships for kids from underprivileged backgrounds. She became genuinely passionate about it, and I started to see glimpses of the woman I'd hoped she could be. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it. But Mama Rose was always there, the steady presence that had guided me through every difficult moment of my life. She'd tell me, "Love isn't about finding someone perfect, Marcus. It's about finding someone willing to grow and growing alongside them. Victoria is trying. The question is, are you willing to try too?" Eventually, Victoria moved back home. We didn't just pick up where we left off. We started over, building something new on a foundation of honesty instead of illusion. We had rules now. No more secrets. No more pretending. If something bothered one of us, we talked about it immediately. And most importantly, Mama Rose was no longer just tolerated in our home, she was celebrated. Victoria made sure of it. 2 years after that pivotal evening, we threw a party for Mama Rose's 75th birthday. It was her idea to make it a concert. She wanted to sing, really sing, for everyone who'd been part of her life. We rented out a small theater, invited everyone from our old neighborhood, her church, the community center where Victoria now volunteered. We also invited some of my business associates and a few of Victoria's friends who'd proven themselves to be genuine. The night of the concert, I stood backstage with Mama Rose as she prepared to go on. She was wearing a stunning blue gown that Victoria had helped her pick out, her hair styled beautifully, looking every bit the star she'd always been in my eyes. She was nervous, I could tell, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her microphone. "What if I'm not as good as I used to be?" she asked me. "What if my voice is gone?" I took her hands in mine and looked into her eyes. "Mama, your voice could never be gone. It's not just in your throat. It's in your heart, and that's never aged a day." She smiled at that, squeezed my hands and took a deep breath. Then Victoria appeared, looking beautiful in a red dress, and she did something that made my heart swell. She took Mama Rose's other hand and said, "You've got this, Mama Rose. We're all here because we love you. Just sing like you did that day in the living room. Sing from your soul." Mama Rose looked between us, her eyes filling with tears, and nodded. The three of us stood there for a moment, hands linked, a family that had been broken and rebuilt into something stronger. Then the stage manager gave the signal, and Mama Rose walked out onto that stage. The applause was immediate and thunderous. She stood in the spotlight looking out at all those faces, and I saw her transform. The nervousness melted away, replaced by pure joy. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The song was Amazing Grace, and she sang it like I'd never heard it before. Her voice soared through that theater, powerful and clear, filled with every ounce of love and pain and triumph she'd experienced in her 75 years. People were on their feet before she even finished the first verse. I looked over at Victoria, and she was crying, but this time they were tears of joy and admiration, not shame. Mama Rose sang for an hour, moving through gospel, blues, jazz, and soul. She told stories between songs, stories about her life, about raising me, about learning to forgive and be forgiven. She talked about how family wasn't always about blood, but about choice and commitment. She looked right at Victoria when she said that, and my wife smiled through her tears. When Mama Rose finally took her bow, the standing ovation lasted for 10 minutes. People were cheering, crying, celebrating this woman who'd spent her whole life lifting others up and was finally getting her moment in the spotlight. After the concert, we had a reception, and I watched as person after person came up to Mama Rose to tell her how her voice had touched them, how her story had inspired them. Victoria stayed by her side the whole night, not as a dutiful daughter-in-law, but as someone who genuinely loved and respected her. At one point, I overheard Victoria talking to one of her old friends from her previous social circle, a woman who'd made dismissive comments about Mama Rose in the past. The woman said something like, "Well, I suppose she's quite talented for someone of her background." Victoria's response made me proud. She looked the woman dead in the eye and said, "She's talented, period. Her background is what makes her remarkable, not something to be qualified or dismissed. If you can't see that, then maybe you should leave." The woman sputtered and walked away, and Victoria turned to find me watching. She shrugged and smiled. "I'm done apologizing for the people I love," she said. That night, after everyone had gone home and the three of us were sitting in the living room, exhausted but happy, Mama Rose looked at us and said, "You know, when I picked up that baby in the hospital all those years ago, I never imagined this would be my life. I thought I'd raise you, Marcus, do my best, and hope you turned out okay. But this, all of this, is more than I ever dreamed. Not the money or the big house, but this. Having a family that chose to love each other even when it was hard. That's the real blessing." Victoria reached over and took Mama Rose's hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said quietly. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving." Mama Rose smiled and patted her hand. "Baby girl, we all need saving sometimes. The trick is being brave enough to accept the help when it comes." In the years that followed, our family continued to grow and evolve. Victoria and I had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Mama Rose was there for every moment. She sang to them the same songs she'd sung to me, told them the same stories, taught them the same lessons about character and kindness. My son's first word was Mama, and he was looking right at Mama Rose when he said it. Victoria laughed and said it was perfect. We also started a foundation in Mama Rose's name, dedicated to supporting single parents and foster families. Victoria ran it with a passion I'd never seen in her before. She'd found her purpose, and it was beautiful to watch. She'd often say that Mama Rose had saved her life, not just her marriage, but her actual life. I was becoming someone I hated, she'd tell people. Mama Rose showed me a different way to be. Mama Rose lived to be 92 years old. She stayed sharp and vibrant until the very end, still singing, still telling stories, still being the heart of our family. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by everyone who loved her, I felt like a piece of my soul had been torn away. The funeral was massive. People came from all over the country, lives she'd touched in ways I'd never even known about. Person after person stood up to share stories about how Mama Rose had helped them, encouraged them, believed in them when no one else did. Victoria gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears. She talked about how Mama Rose had taught her what it meant to be truly wealthy, not in money but in love and integrity. She talked about the grace Mama Rose had shown her when she deserved none, and how that grace had changed the entire trajectory of her life. I came into this family as an outsider, Victoria said, someone who didn't understand its value. Mama Rose could have rejected me, could have convinced Marcus to leave me, and she would have been justified. Instead, she loved me into becoming a better person. She saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. That's who she was. She saw the best in everyone and loved them until they could see it too. My own eulogy was shorter. I couldn't get through much without breaking down. I simply said, Mama Rose found me when I had nothing and no one. She gave me everything. She taught me that family is a choice, that love is an action, and that the measure of a life isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. She gave away her whole life for me, and I will spend the rest of mine trying to honor that gift. Mama, wherever you are, I hope you're singing. I hope heaven is filled with your voice, and I hope you know that everything good in me came from you. We buried her in a beautiful cemetery with a view of the mountains she'd always loved. Her headstone was simple, just her name and the dates of her life with one line underneath. She sang love into the world. Every year on her birthday, we go back to that theater and hold a concert in her honor. Local singers perform, we share stories, and we celebrate the life of a woman who changed so many lives simply by choosing to love. Looking back now, I realized that the moment I walked in and saw Mama Rose singing to Victoria wasn't just a turning point in my marriage. It was a turning point in all of our lives. It was the moment when secrets became truth, when pride became humility, when judgment became grace. Mama Rose's voice didn't just fill a room that day. It broke down walls, healed wounds, and reminded us all of what really matters. I built $1 billion company, and people call me successful. But my real success isn't measured in dollars or deals. It's measured in the family we built, the love we chose, and the legacy Mama Rose left behind. She taught me that you don't need a stage to make an impact. You don't need fame or fortune to change lives. You just need a willing heart and the courage to love people even when they don't deserve it, even when it's hard, even when the world tells you they're not worth it. Victoria often says that Mama Rose's voice saved her, and I suppose that's true. But it wasn't just the beauty of her singing. It was what that voice represented. Authenticity, resilience, unconditional love, and the refusal to let bitterness win. Mama Rose had every reason to be bitter. Life had been hard on her. She'd lost people she loved, worked jobs that broke her body, faced discrimination and hardship at every turn. But she chose joy. She chose to sing. She chose to love. And in doing so, she showed us all how to live. My children are teenagers now, and they never got to know Mama Rose as adults, but they carry her with them. My daughter wants to be a social worker, inspired by the stories of how Mama Rose helped everyone in our old neighborhood. My son is studying music, determined to preserve the songs and stories Mama Rose passed down. Victoria and I are still together, still working on our marriage every day, still grateful for the second chance Mama Rose's grace afforded us. Sometimes, late at night, I'll go into the music room in our house, the one we built as a replica of Mama Rose's room in the guest house. I'll sit in her chair, Close my eyes and I swear I can still hear her voice. Not just in my memory, but in the walls, in the air, in the very foundation of our home. Her voice is woven into everything we are, everything we've become. And I know that as long as we keep singing her songs, telling her stories and living by her example, she'll never really be gone. That's the thing about love, like Mama Rose's. It doesn't die. It multiplies. It spreads. It echoes through generations. Every time I choose patience over anger, every time Victoria chooses humility over pride, every time our children choose kindness over cruelty, that's Mama Rose. That's her voice. Still singing, still teaching, still loving us into being better than we were. I never thought the woman who raised me would be the one my wife tried to destroy. But I also never imagined that the same woman would be the one to save us all. Mama Rose didn't just give me life. She gave me a blueprint for how to live it. And now every day I try to honor that gift by loving the way she loved, fiercely, unconditionally, and with a song in my heart. If there's anything I want people to take away from our story, it's this. The people who raise us, who love us when we're unlovable, who see our potential when we're at our worst, those are the people who deserve our loyalty and our honor. Not because of their status or their wealth or their accomplishments, but because of their character. Mama Rose was a janitor, a laundromat worker, a church singer. But she was also a hero, a teacher, a saint. She was everything that matters and nothing that doesn't. And when I came home early that day and heard her singing, when I saw my wife crying and finally understanding what I'd known all along, that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment we stopped pretending and started being real. That was the moment Mama Rose's voice, the voice that had guided me through every challenge of my life, sang us all back together. I'm a billionaire. I've built companies, made deals, changed industries. But none of that compares to what Mama Rose built. She built a family out of nothing. She built love where there was abandonment. She built hope where there was despair. And she did it all with grace, with dignity, and with a voice that could move heaven and earth. That's the real success story. That's the legacy that matters. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure the world knows her name and remembers her song.